Hi, I'm Carl Franklin. In this episode, I'm starting a series on creating a custom podcast client MAUI Blazor app. Even though it's hard-coded for accessing my podcast, .NET Rocks, you can modify it for any podcast with a bit of customization. In the last episode, I showed you how to use a new MAUI Audio plugin to play audio from any stream. Now we're going to put that to practical use and write a fully featured podcast client app. I'm going to take this app from step 1 to publishing in the app stores. .NET is rocking in the house, and that's coming right up on the .NET Show. So before we start, make sure that you have the current version of Visual Studio. The current version for me is 17.3.4. You don't need professional. You can use community. 17.3.4 has a bug pairing to a Mac. And I think that there's a preview update that addresses it, but maybe you want to wait till 17.3.5 if you have a Mac and you want to pair to it. But I'm not going to pair to my Mac. I'm going to get around that in a clever way. As for workloads, you want at least the ASP.NET and web development workload and the MAUI workload. So I'm going to create a new .NET MAUI Blazor app. I'm going to call it MAUI DNR1 with MAUI in all caps. So the first thing I'm going to do is going to get rid of some cruft. I'm going to get rid of the data folder, which has these two classes in it. Going to get rid of fetch data and counter razor. And in shared, going to get rid of the nav menu and survey prompt. Just going to hit delete, confirm, bye-bye. Next, being an index, we're going to take this line out, survey prompt. Don't need that. We're going to end up replacing this anyway, but we want to run it first, and that'll cause a problem. Now go to MauiProgram.cs. We don't need this line right here using MAUI DNR1 data, and we don't need this right here, adding the weather forecast service. Next, we're going to simplify the main layout. All we want is the body and its respective tags and classes. Next, I'm going to create a globals class. That's a static class, globals.cs. Now, I've talked about this before. Setting the width and height in Windows. Here's why. If I run this, the window ends up being huge. Look at how far it goes. That's ginormous. And even if I size it and manually move it, when I close it and run it again, it's still going to be ginormous. So I've got some code to resize and move the app window. And this is the first step. If we're running on the Windows platform, I got some using statements. In my static globals class, I have the width and height that I want to set them to. And I also have an app window reference. Now, this is only valid on Windows, so that's why I want this compiler directive right there. So the reason I need globals at all is because I want to access these things from two different places. You see, I can set the window width and height in app.XAML.cs, but the position needs to be based on the width and height of the screen because I want to put it in the middle of the screen, and you can't get that in app.XAML.cs. But you can size it. You just can't move it. You can't find a position. So that's why we need this in two places. So let's start with app.XAML.cs. Again, we have this Windows directive and our using statements. Down here in the app constructor, we've got a window handler. The window handler passes in a handler and a view. We use the handler to get the virtual view, the MAUI window, and the platform view, which is the native window. We activate the native window. We get a window handle and a window ID from that window handle. And then we use app window get from window ID to get our app window. Then, and only then, can we call resize. So I don't want to harp on this because it's a hack, and there might be a better way to do this in the future, but this works. So this is where we size the window. Where do we move it? Well, that's got to be in main page XAML.cs. Again, our using statements predicated on the fact that we're in Windows. I'm going to handle the loaded event. And in the loaded event, I'm going to use device.display.current.main.display.info to get the width and height. I'm going to do some math here to find the position in the center of the screen. And then I can call global's app window move. You're going to see it on the left-hand side of your screen after it gets sized here. And then it's going to quickly move over to the center. And I don't have a better solution. And I wish somebody would tell me a better solution. But I'm sure it's just temporary. So now when I run this again, after showing briefly on the left-hand side of my screen, it actually comes to the center. Yay. Next, I need some navigation buttons that are in the repo. And I'm going to put those in my web root. And here they are. Fast forward, pause, play, rewind, and stop. And I'm going to say copy if newer. I don't know if I need that, but I'm in the habit, so I always do it. All right, now we're going to add audio support. If you saw episode 27 of the .NET show playing audio in a MAUI app, that's exactly the same stuff I'm going to use. So we're going to go to the CS project file, and I'm going to add an item group here with 2 package references. Of course, if you want to use the package manager console or even Visual Studio, you can do that too. Now I'm going to add to MauiProgram.cs a global using statement for our plugin. And then right here, I'm going to add the audio manager from audiomanager.current as a singleton object. So this will allow us to inject an iAudioManager instance wherever we need it. So from the iAudioManager instance, we can create an iAudioPlayer instance to play audio and do everything else that comes with an audio player. These instances operate independently of each other and will even play in the background. So for example, you can have one instance playing a soundtrack for a game, which will be lower in volume, and then you could use another player instance for each sound effect that you want to play and trigger them at will. So in our application though, we only want one player active at a time. All right, so let's go to our _imports and add that using statement there. Next thing I want to do is create an enumeration called MediaState. And that's going to be stopped, paused, or playing. The reason I have to do that is that iAudioPlayer only exposes an isPlaying bool property, but it doesn't tell you if your app is paused. So that's a specifically different state from stopped. Because if it's stopped and then we play, I want to play from the beginning. If it's paused and then we play, I want to continue where I left off. Now we're going to need some models, and this gets to the whole .NET Rocks data. The API gives us objects of different model types. So we need to define those models here. So I'm going to add a models folder. And I'm just going to drag them in, drop them in the models folder. There they are. So let's start with show. So show has an ID, primary key, whether it's enabled or not, because sometimes we have stuff in the database that isn't published. That really should be published. We have a show number, which is probably different from the ID. A show title, a description, date recorded, date published, show date string, which we don't use anymore, day of week, which we don't use anymore, notes, and then show details, which we'll talk about in a minute. And then we generate a list display string, which has the show number, the date published, and the show title. Now let's talk about show details, because this is all the stuff that's associated with the show. Guests, links, sponsors, which should really be ads, tags, and files. And you can guess what pretty much all of these do. Now in this app, we're not going to deal with guests and sponsors and links, tags. We're not going to do that, at least not yet. But just so that you know, those are there. We're also not going to deal with playlists just yet. This is something that I created in the Xamarin version of this app, which I covered in previous episodes of the .NET show. We'll get to this. For now, we have our models. That's good. So let's go back to MAUI Program and add this global using MAUI DNR1 models. Now we're going to create a services folder and add an API service to it. So this API service uses an HTTP client to go to my read-only API, PWAP client API, Azure Websites.net shows. The show name is .NET Rocks. I've got methods for getting all the shows, getting filtered shows, which is kind of cool, getting the number of shows, getting a range of shows, first number, last number, getting with details, getting the details by themselves, and one to get show numbers, just all of the numbers. And then you can say get by show numbers, which has this guy right here, takes a get by show number request, part of our models. It's going to have the show name and a list of indexes, which are the show numbers. Now we have more global usings to add MAUI DNR1 services, and also ASP.NET Core components, because we're going to do some code behind, and it's just easier to make that a global. And now we have to add the API service as a singleton also, if we want to use that. All right, now it's time for markup and code. So let's add to pages a class called Index.razor.cs. So this is our code behind for index. I'm injecting an API service and a navigation manager. I got a list of show numbers. I've got the number of records to read, which is how many records we're going to read in one block. And I defaulted that to 20, but you can set that to whatever you want. I'm keeping track of the last show number. You'll see why. I have an episode filter. So the episode filter is a string. And if we start typing in the filter at the top of the page, a string like Azure, then any show with Azure in the title will come back from get next batch of shows. So get next batch of shows, the first thing it does is it says, hey, if this episode filter is set, clear my local list of shows, which is an observable collection of show, and then call get next batch of filtered shows and return. So get next batch of filtered shows calls the API service get filtered shows with the episode filter, the number of shows in all shows, and then records to read. Now we add those to all shows. So you can see this is mostly just calling the API service and doing stuff. Here's my observable collection of show, all shows. And we're calling get next batch of shows when we load up. So continuing on, if we don't have a filter, if I don't have any show numbers downloaded yet, right, I'm going to call get show numbers, and that gets my list of int show numbers, and then I save the last show number. So now I create a get by show numbers request. Show name is .NET Rocks, and I get my indexes from X and show numbers, where X is less than the last show number and greater than or equal to the last show number minus records to read. It's just a little math. Don't be scared. Okay, then I call get by show numbers, pass that request, and add those to all shows, and I get my last show number. The only other thing that I didn't show you is navigate to detail page. So we're going to call this from the UI when the user clicks on or touches a show. We're going to take the show number and pass it here, and that's going to bring us to our details page with a show number parameter. Now we don't have a details page yet, but we'll get there. First, let's take over index. This is the kind of markup that I like. It's clean, it's easy to understand. I've got my filter up here. That's an input bound to episode filter. I have the reset filter button. Yeah, I didn't even talk about reset filter. Clears the show numbers, clears all shows, clears the episode filter. In other words, the last 20 shows show up. Okay, now we go through all the shows, show the show title, show the episode, show number, and then published on this date. We show the description, and then here's our button where we're navigating to the detail page with the show number. And it just says episode details in the button. And then at the bottom of all that, if all shows count is greater than 0, in other words, if we've got some shows, we're going to have a button that says get next batch of shows, and that's what that calls. Pretty simple. So let's run the app. It's not much, but it works. Right? This is the last episode we published Thursday, September 22nd, with the description. and here's the episode details. Now, if I click this, nothing's going to happen. Actually, it's going to say, sorry, there's nothing at this address. And we don't have a way to get back, so we're kind of screwed at this point. But I did want you to see what it looks like. Also, the filter works. Let's type Azure, tab, and now we have the first 20 shows that have Azure in the title. And at the bottom, we see load more shows. Let's try that out. I'm going to reset, get the top 20. All right, and now when I say load more shows, boom, we get 20 more. Pretty cool. I like this. All right, now let's make a details page. Go to pages, add a Razor component, call it details. Now we don't have any code behind, so these variables doesn't understand yet. So let's add the code behind now. Details.razor.cs. All right, so let's start with the markup since that's fairly easy to understand. So we have a variable called this show. And this show is a show. So that has on it the show number, the title, the description, the date, all that stuff. Here's the title, showing the same stuff that we showed before. Episode number, published, long date string, description, no problem. Now this is where we have our audio controls. Rewind, play audio, pause audio, stop audio, forward. And then we have a progress bar that shows the percentage. Now there's another thing we need to do first, which is add to pages a CSS file. Details.razor.cs, and it's going to have an image button class, which we're going to use in our code. All right, so before I explain all this, let's just run it and show you the behavior. All right, I'm going to go down to this guy right here, Just Enough Design with Catherine, Grace, and Nance. Here are the details. Now, the first thing you notice is this back button, which gets us back where we were. Happy, happy. So if we go back here and play, downloading. Hey, guess what? The .NET Developer Days quotes by Scott says 2-day online read. This is Carl Franklin. And what I'm doing essentially is fast forwarding 10 seconds at a time.
This is Richard Campbell.
And we're at Rocks. We are doing it
20. I mean, I guess I've done what I think there's wrong.
I can go back 10 seconds at a time.
2.
Come on now. And if I stop, you've only been... Now I can play again. It starts from the beginning.
In there, so
right. If it's playing, and I go back,
for
everything goes away. So that's what we want. That's all we're doing today. So let's go over the code. So I showed you the details. It's just buttons, right? But the thing that I didn't show you is this class: the rewind button class, play button class, pause button class, stop button class, forward button class. I'm going to dynamically set the class of these images to either image button, in which case when we press them or click them or make them active, they're going to go down to 95% of the size. So it simulates a button click. So that's going to be when they're enabled, right? Now enabling is done with opacity because these aren't real buttons, they're images, right? So you need to control them with opacity. And we have 2 opacity values. Play opacity, which is 1, and controls opacity, which is 0.5, right? But we're going to reassign these things to make the buttons enabled or disabled. All right, so now let's jump into the code. Just as before, I have an API service and a navigation manager, but I also have an audio manager. Show number is the string parameter that's passed into the page. If you look up here, that's where it's defined, right? And this is the only path. So you can't call details without a show number. It has to be details/show number. Remember, Blazor was made for the web. So this is a URL route, really. Although there is no URL bar, you don't see anything. This is how we navigate from page to page in Blazor, even MAUI Blazor. So it has to be a string because parameters on the web are all strings, right? So what I do is I take that show number string, convert it to an int. Let's go down to the bottom here. So on initialized async, I want to see if that string show number is not null. And if it isn't, I'm going to do all this in a try catch because who knows, it could fail because it's input and input is evil. I'm going to convert the show number to an int. And then I'm going to set this show, which I already told you about. This is just a show object. to API service get show with details. Now you would think get show with details gets you all the show details, but it doesn't. So I have to call get show details to get the show details. Now the only thing I need from that is the file URL. And that is going to be saved into this URL field. Okay. All right, so there's this show. Now let's go down the list. We have a nullable iAudio player, which is our media player. We have a nullable file stream. That's a stream used for playing. And the reason that I have it up here shared is because we have an event that we want to handle from the player, and that's where we want to close the stream. So the stream has to exist at the page level. Then I have a MediaState, which is, remember, playing, paused, or stopped. Not necessarily in that order. I have my URL, which is the file that I want to go get. This audio message is either going to be playing, paused, or error. It could also be downloading or an error, as I said before. The percentage is a double. This is the percentage of the audio played, and that is used to set the progress bar value. I have the string, the progress percentage, which is a format percent, like 2%, whatever. I don't use that, but you can use it if you want. I have the play position, which is a string that's going to say the current position / the total duration. And remember, I have controls opacity and play opacity. This is what they are, 0.5 and 1. My play button class is going to be image button. All the other button classes are going to be nothing. They're not buttons. Then I have a system timers timer. So this is really where I'm setting the state to either playing, paused, or stopped, right? And I'm going to call this so that I can set the UI and change the UI when that state changes. Now, this state is not part of the player. Remember, this is my media state. I created this externally. So therefore, I have to control it. So for playing, the controls opacity is going to be 1. That's all of the controls, what the controls are set to other than play. The play opacity is going to be 0.5. The audio message is going to be playing. The play button class, because play is going to be disabled, right? Play opacity disabled. And all the rest of the buttons are going to have that image button class, which allows them to get smaller when you click on them. So if we're paused or stopped, I'm going to do the opposite. The controls are now disabled. The play is enabled. The play button gets the image button class. Now it reacts like a button. And the rest of them are nothing. They're just images. And now if we're stopped, I'm going to reset the percentage, the audio message, and the play position. Otherwise, if we're not stopped, that means we're paused, and I'm going to set the audio message to paused. Now, when I navigate home, that's that button, right? That's the button at the top. This guy right here, navigate home, my arrow left. I'm going to call cleanup and then navigate to the home screen. So cleanup, let's talk about that. So this is where we clean up everything. Set the media state to stopped, which changes the UI. We're going to dispose the stream if we have a stream. If we don't worry about it. Same with the timer. And now I have to unhook the player event if the player is not null. So I'm unhooking the event and then also calling dispose on the player. Player playback ended happens either when the user presses stop or the playback reaches the end. All right, let's talk about play audio. So this happens when the user clicks the play button. So if we're already playing, we shouldn't be able to come here if we're already playing because the button UI should disable that. But if we are, return. If we're paused, we want to continue playing. So just say play and set the state to playing and get out. If there's no URL specified, then we have a problem. We can't play without having a URL. And the URL should come from showDetails file.url. So this is where we start playing. The first thing we do is we get the cache directory, which in a MAUI app is file system current cache directory. Then we get the fully qualified path to the local file. Now, in the last episode, I took just the end of the file name and I looked for that in the cache, but with the .NET Rocks feed, which is where we get these files from, the file URL, they all end in stream.mp3. So I have to take the whole URL minus https:// and then replace all the forward slashes with dashes so I get an approximation of the unique URL to that file. And that's going to be my file name, my local file name. So if the file does not exist, I'm going to let the user know we're trying to download, set the audio message to downloading, and this is the code that downloads the file from the URL. This is all stuff that I covered in the last episode, right? So now I read it and I get the stream. I create the audio player from the stream. I wire up the playback ended event, create my new timer every 50 milliseconds. This elapsed is going to happen, and I calculate my percentage. I'm not going to use this progress percent, but if you want to, you can put that somewhere. And then I'm going to get this play position string, which is going to be the current position, minutes and seconds, a slash, and then the duration, minutes and seconds. See, that's how that works. Then I start the timer, I start playing. I tell the UI that we're playing, and we're done. All right, the rest of these are for the buttons. Forward, go forward. If we're playing, I'm going to calculate the position 10 seconds from now. And if that's less than the duration, I'm going to seek to it. Otherwise, that means we're in the last 10 seconds of the show. Stop the audio. And stop audio just says, hey, if we're playing, stop. Pause audio says we're playing, pause. Rewind does the opposite of forward. If we're playing, calculate the position 10 seconds before now. And if that's less than 0, that means we're in the first 10 seconds of the content. Set it to 0 and then seek to that position. So now let's check it out on different platforms. Here it is running on my Android phone. Now I notice that this button is bumped down, and I can fix that. Watch this. This filter right here, we're just going to set the width to 50%. Now let's try it again. That's better. So let's type Azure in here. Here we go. And I go to episode details, play, downloading.
It's the final month of the season. Come watch.
And that's an ad, so I'll skip over that.
Hartford Athletic take on the fat. If you know.
Welcome back to .NET Rocks. This is Carl Franklin.
And this is Richard Campbell.
And we're live on both. And here it is running on my Mac desktop. I'll go to this guy and play.
Make a huge splash.
And of course, that's an ad. So it works. Go back. Good to go. And here it is running in an iPad, an iOS simulator on my Mac. Let's go to another one and play.
Hey, guess what? The .NET Developer Days conference is happening.
And it works. In this episode, we got off to a good start with the MAUI Blazor .NET Rocks podcast client app. In the next episode, we'll add the playlist feature that we created in the Xamarin version. More to come. Thanks for watching. Thanks for watching. Please visit blazortrain.com and the .NETshow.com for more great content.